Welcome to the Hazard Class Podcast. This is the podcast where I ask my stupid questions to some of the smartest people in and around the world of emergency services. My guest this week is the CEO and founder of Spotter Global, a company that has revolutionized the way we protect critical infrastructure with advanced radar systems. With a background in radar technology, RF, and digital signal processing, he's known for his focus on productivity. He lives by the 3 R's: record, remind, and report, a framework that has helped him and his team stay on track in building innovative solutions. Today, we're talking to Logan Harris. Logan, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Of course, yeah. I'm interested to talk about the work you're doing. So you are in advanced radar systems. Is this a thing that you could have possibly imagined you would be into as a child? Right? It's like, yeah.
Not at all. Though I've always been, interested in technology since I was a little child. I was the type of kid that would go and take, radios apart and put them back together. I built, like when I was 12, I built a shortwave radio out of a standard transistor radio and stuck like a 12-foot antenna using just wire, so I could pick up, broadcasts that were 12,000 miles away, halfway around the world. So I was that type of kid.
Wow. What inspired that? What was the inspiration to be so interested in technology?
I'm not really sure. It's just kind of something I always had. I remember, of course, seeing very early on the broadcasts about the space program. And I always thought, hey, that's really cool, all the computers and stuff. And I would even build my own fake computers, like I'd draw them on cardboard boxes and stuff like that. And this was before the PCs were, even available. And I was one of the first kids to get one of these Timex Sinclairs. They're $100 computers that came out in like early 80s. And I started programming when I was like 11 years old.
Wow. So what did your parents do then growing up, like that you saw?
Well, my parents were educators. They really didn't have much in terms of technology per se. That wasn't their thing, but they were both teachers. And so they definitely encouraged me along that path.
So I would imagine if both your parents are educators, you probably were pretty well incentivized to care about school and engage in school. And I would imagine to be in the career field you're in, you have had to seek some advanced education and, probably pretty well apply yourself along the way. Would that be fair to say?
That would be, but I also had a lot of other motivation as well. Growing up, I worked construction a lot to pay the bills. And being outside on the top of a I balancing, on a wall, putting in trusses, and it's 105 degrees out, and you're thinking, I think I better go through and finish my degree if I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So where does the crossover start to occur in terms of the education that you had? My understanding is that electrical engineering? What did you go to school for?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, electrical. Uh-huh.
So you go to school for electrical engineering. How did you make the leap to be working in defense in like systems protections and infrastructure protections? Where did that come from?
It was 9/11. It was 9/11. Yep. So when 9/11 happened, I was working for another radar company. Well, they didn't start out as a radar company. It's a company called Wavetronics, and they were doing, and I was their chief technology officer, and we developed these small radar systems for monitoring traffic flow on the freeways and highways. And then 9/11 happened. and that kind of just shocked everybody, and myself included. And at that time, they were putting out these what they call these broad area announcements, these BAAs. The government was saying, just we're looking for all kinds of different ways to say how can we defend the United States from all these different types of attacks. And so myself and a few other engineers we just started spitballing. Okay, what can we do? Small radar. What are the defense applications for small radar systems? And at the time, radar systems were big, they were bulky, they were expensive, and you couldn't buy these small radar systems that we have today. And so one of the first things we came up with, myself and this other engineer actually started another company to commercialize that with the support of Wavetronics, was what is called a synthetic aperture radar, which is an imaging radar. It's a radar that you put to a plane or a small drone, and you fly it across the landscape, and it will create images using radar instead of optics.
So how does that in those applications, I'm more familiar with like LiDAR, right? Which would that be laser versus So give me, before we get, I'm sure we're going to talk a ton about radar systems. Give me like the caveman's version of what radar is and how it works.
And yes, in the concept, it's actually quite simple. It's similar to LiDAR. It's just using a different frequency of the kind of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we use radio waves instead of light. They're all electromagnetic waves, but at the radar frequencies, we're looking at wavelengths like the ones we use are the wavelength of the emissions is about an inch and a half. Now at a light frequency, the wavelength is nanometers. That's like 1/1000th of a meter is the wavelength. So you can think, well, if you're trying to penetrate through rain or fog or snow, then the radio waves go through it much better than the light does. And that's the real difference there, is saying with LiDAR or light, then when you have moisture in the air, it obstructs and makes it very difficult for you to see through the fog and the rain and the snow and the dust. And that's where the radar really comes in.
And so the radar, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but you're sending a signal out, you're measuring the length of time it takes for it to come back, or how are you getting the actual measurement?
Yeah, in essence, it's that. It's the time that it goes out, bounces off of things, and then come back. And then we do something what we call motion target indication.
No, you're
what
good.
do we call motion filtering, where we filter out things that are stationary. If we're looking for things that are moving, or if we're looking for things that are stationary, we can look for those as well. So that allows us to, illuminate a large volume of space and then say, okay, what changed in the last, few hundred milliseconds or a fraction of a second? What has changed in that whole scene, and then be able to say where it is.
And so is that using AI integration, or what is that? How does that system, work?
Yes. So we do use AI for a different level, but on the basic level, it is saying, okay, where are things located that have changed? Like, for instance, okay, someone is walking, and you want to say, okay, over this huge space, and we're talking hundreds of acres with some of our radar systems that we use. We'll cover hundreds of acres, and in that 100 of acres, is there anything that's moving? And so we use kind of what we call a good way to kind of explain this is a holographic processing, where we look at the differences in the patterns of the return waves that come back to us. Now think of it as like if you throw a rock into a pond, when you throw that rock out there, it kind of spreads all out, and then it bounces off of things and then comes back. So it's the same technique that the sonar uses, or like a bat, or a dolphin uses for navigation, where it there's a ping that it sends out, it bounces off of things, it comes back, and then you look to say, and then from all that information that comes back, then it's able to pinpoint the kind of location and how far away that those targets are.
So if you're talking about a system that overwatches, hundreds of acres potentially, what level of specificity can you find things? Like how granular are the locatability of things?
Yeah, it's really quite precise. It's like putting a GPS tracker. So to kind of give you an estimation of the accuracy, is that for range will be within a yard or two, and then an angle plus or minus 1 degrees. So precise enough that you can you can direct a camera precisely onto that target.
How big does a target need to be found by the system?
It can be very small. It all depends on which system it is and what the targets are that you're interested in. Case in point, when you're looking at these small drones, we have radar systems that are specifically built to target these drones, and these drones are a pound. They weigh a pound, and we can track those at hundreds of yards away.
Wow. What are the limitations then in terms of obviously, like for every industry there is to detect, there's an industry to defend or like make things less detectable. Who's winning that battle right now?
Yeah, and that is definitely what is happening in Ukraine right now between Russia and Ukraine, is that they used to use the drones have become the primary offensive weapon in Ukraine. And because they have all kinds of different ones, they have high flying ones, they've got small ones, they've got really high speed ones. And last year, even just last year in 2024, in 2024, they were using primarily RF controlled drones, where you had a controller, a wireless controller, and then they would fly those in, put some payload explosives on them, fly them into tanks and people and all kinds of stuff. But then, the countermeasure to that was these RF detectors. We call them RF sniffers, or RFDF. And these sniffers would pick up their signal, and then you could locate the drone from that, that RF signal that they were transmitting, and you could locate the operator, and then they could be targeted. And that was, fairly effective for a while. But then the Russians came up with what is called a fiber optic guided drone, a fog drone. And with these fiber optically guided drones, now it's a fly-by-wire. They have this fiber optic spool that comes out, and this really thin, basically, glass cable, like a little spider web that comes out of the back of these drones. And now there's no RF emissions. There's nothing for the RF sniffers to detect. And these are, fast, they're small, they fly low to the ground, so they can't be detected by, kind of standard large, air defense type radar systems. And that right there, that is kind of that's the wave of the future. And in fact, you can go search on Alibaba right now for a fiber optically guided drone, and you can find a kit for $350 to put a 10-kilometer fiber onto your drone.
10
for $350.
kilometers?
10 kilometers for $350.
Do you have any
from Alibaba?
That's crazy. Do you have any frame of reference for how much a 10-meter fiber optic cable weighs?
It is for 10 kilometers. It weighs about 1.5 to 2 pounds.
What?
Yes.
That is
Yep.
insane. I recently, it's interesting you bring it up because I recently saw a picture it was showing, I don't know what you'd call it, a village or a town in Ukraine, and it was just like covered with these wires. Like it looked like it was like giant spiders had taken over or something. And they were talking
Exactly.
about that. But it's kind of interesting how as this technology advances, we are almost going backwards in a weird way, right? We had wireless technology. Now we're going back to wired technology because it's less detectable. So then I would imagine someone that's in your world is now going, well, how the hell do we detect these things, right? And I would imagine it's not, the RF isn't going to be the way because it can't be, but you can still detect them with your radar systems because they're still an object in space, right?
That's correct. Yes. And that's where radar, and small radar in particular, plays in. And that's where I got involved. Who was trying to solve the problem of saying there's many situations like this one where a large radar system isn't going to have the type of coverage you need because these are literally flying feet above the ground. I mean, if you see some of the videos that come out of Ukraine about these fiber optic drones, I mean, they're flying below the tree lines. So a standard air defense radar system isn't built for that. They try to filter out all that stuff, and now that's the stuff that you need to, those are the things you need to detect. And that's where the compact radar comes in, is now you can deploy in scale, kind of say, these are all like networked across a large perimeter, or attached to vehicles, or short range defensive weapon systems that can pick up these small drones, target them, and take them down.
Where falls the line between what would be considered a large radar system and a small radar or a mid-sized? Like, is there clear-cut delineation between these different like technology groups?
Yeah, and it really comes to kind of like the size, weight, and power. And like a compact radar is around 1 to 10 pounds. Because you think about it, you got to haul this in. If it's a compact radar, you can put it into a backpack or a small box. A small group can backpack it in. Like a larger defense radar, these are hundreds of pounds, and you got to have a big generator. It takes a lot of a lot of fuel to keep those things going. So that is kind of like the differentiator. And that's where Spotter came in originally back in 2009 when I formed the company, is that there wasn't such a thing as compact radar, or we call it compact surveillance radar. And that's where the special forces were coming to us and saying, we got our guys going out onto these village stability operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they can't take one of these big systems with them. They're literally jumping out of a plane with their equipment. And so they needed something small, lightweight. And that's when DARPA came to us and said, hey, can you build us one? And that's what we did. We built them based off of what we'd learned doing this, imaging radar. We built a radar with a 1,000-meter range. That's 1,000-yard range. In a radar that weighed 3.5 pounds and consumed 14 watts of power. That's less power than a small LED light bulb.
There's so many questions I could have about that alone.
Okay.
Talk to me about how it's even possible. Because the thing I was thinking was like, well, in terms of battery powered things, which I presume this is battery powered, like one of the biggest things that contributes to the weight is the batteries themselves. But with a power consumption that's that low, you probably need relatively little battery infrastructure, right?
Correct. Yeah. Like you can take what these military batteries, lithium ion military battery, that weigh about 2 pounds, and you can power one of these radars pretty much, for 16 hours. And that's a little battery, it's like not too big at all.
But when some of these teams take these on longer duration deployments, is it solar? How are you recapturing energy?
Yeah, a lot of times they'll use solar to recharge them, or they'll hook it up to their vehicle power to recharge their battery packs. So any ways that you would recharge a battery, that's what they do.
Okay, there's not an integrated recharging system or something like that inside it. No.
No.
So I do want to keep getting into the nitty gritty because I am very interested in it, but I don't want to miss over how we got to the point of you starting your own company, right? So you're working through all these companies.
Yeah.
And developing this technology, further understanding the technology. And at some point, you're like, I should do my own thing, right? So that was 2009, right? You said you kind of moved into the defense space after 9/11 in 2001. So what was the gap between those 2 points? And what was the onus to be like, I'm going to start my own company instead of working for someone else?
Yeah, and I pretty much happened in 2004 when myself and this other engineer formed the radar company to do the airborne imaging radars. So we were the two co-founders. We went out on our own, and that jump was again saying, it's a leap of faith where you say, I believe that what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to develop, is going to make a difference. In my case, it wasn't just about making a buck. That's, in fact, I would say anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur, if it's just about the money, you should go do something else. It's too much work. It's too hard. There's easier ways to make money than being an entrepreneur trying to start something fresh. But there's got to be some more motivation. And my motivation was to make a difference, within my community. And my community at the time was the defense community. And then the motivation between starting Spotter wasn't really necessarily my idea, but rather customers, people like DARPA who were attached, working with the special forces community, saying we need a solution for this problem, and they came to us. And so out of that, I said, yeah, I think I can solve that problem. I think it's a problem that needs to be solved. Plus, I could see there's a whole other realm of possibilities, not just defending our warfighters, but defending our critical infrastructure. And then I said, yeah, I'm going to go. I spun it out to separately because I wanted to focus on that. The other company still in business, they're still doing well. They're still doing airborne radar. So they took the air, I took the ground, and went for it.
So you being, from what I can gather, like the first company to really focus on these small-sized radar systems, what were the problems that needed to be solved to miniaturize radar systems?
Oh, wow. Oh, all the problems. Yes. There's so many problems. Yeah. And that is, boy, I could go on with that for hours, but I'll just kind of summarize, one, there's the technology problems, right? And these are actually technology problems in many ways are the simpler problems because it's about physics and engineering, and they're it's fairly straightforward, once you come up with, the different ideas to solve those. But then there is the more difficult problems. The more difficult problem is saying, well, can you, make it as a business that will survive? Can you get positive cash flow? Can you make a profit? Can you employ people? Can you get the job done? Can you connect with your customers? Can you do it in a manner that solves their problem? Those are the thornier, more difficult problems than even the technology problems.
Well, hey, gang. So I appreciate all the listeners. The show is growing so rapidly. I just appreciate it so much. But if you could just subscribe on YouTube and Spotify, Apple Podcasts, if you could leave a review, that makes a huge difference. Follow us on social media and share the show. Just like it. Whenever you see it, it's okay. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps me a ton. And you just say, I like it. I like it. Right. And if you want to write something mean in the comments, that's okay too. My wife tells me I shouldn't read them, but I do. And sometimes it hurts my feelings, but that's okay. Let me have it. This podcast is brought to you in part by Hikes Boots. You can really tell a lot about a brand by the way they choose to advertise. And Hikes didn't ask me to say anything specific. You know, they sent me a pair of their Fire Eagle Air and their Fire Eagle Extreme. These are awesome structural fire boots. I mean, I can't believe it. I've really, really enjoyed wearing them. My feet feel great, super supportive. They feel like tennis shoes almost. So if you want to check out the boots, go to hikesusa.com. That's HAIXUSA.com, or check the show notes for the direct link. Today's episode is also brought to you by Rigaku Analytical Devices. Those are the folks that have been perfecting the 1064 nanometer Raman longer than a lot of us have even been doing hazmat. And they just launched their 4th generation handheld analyzer, the Icon X. It's built specifically for real world stuff hazmat teams deal with every day. We're talking about dirty powders, mixed materials, dyes, colors, and all the things that make other instruments throw a tantrum. This 1064 nanometer laser means reduced fluorescence. So you get a fast, reliable chemical ID in under a minute instead of staring at a blank screen wondering what the heck went wrong. And this new platform isn't just an upgrade. It's a whole new toolbox. And it supports new accessories, including standoff analysis, so you can get answers without getting too close. If you want an analyzer that's evolving right alongside the hazmat world, check out Rigaku's newest Raman at rigakuanalytical.com, or check out the show notes. Back to the show. You know, with the background in electrical engineering, you know, I don't know how much business, quote unquote, acumen you have at that point, but you have to say, well, we're going to jump into the world of profits and loss and taxes and all this other less fun components of running a business. What was that like, and how did you equip yourself to be able to actually run a business versus just solve the technical problems?
Yeah, and I mean, I'd kind of dabbled. I mean, I'd say more than dabbled. I started prior to working for Wavetronics. I was actually working, for myself. I'd started an internet company way back in 1995 when the web was just starting to begin, and so I started an internet company where I was doing consulting and development work, or companies that wanted to get onto the web. And this is, very early days. People are still using, dial-up modems and, stuff like that. So I did that. I got a small business innovation research grant to do like an educational, type website. I mean, so I'd done some of that. Plus, then when I was at Wavetronics, I was their chief technology officer. So I was very much involved at kind of the high levels of, trying to make a business run and function. So through those type of experiences, I kind of had a background. I kind of knew how a business was supposed to be run and what to do.
You felt pretty equipped by the time you started Spotter to do the high level business management?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's so much to learn and there's so much to do, and that's where, again, like I was saying, earlier about the problems, facing the technical problems are many times the easier problems. It's all of the other things, the people, the sales, the marketing, all the legal, all those types of things in a way are even more difficult or even more complex than the technology itself. And, one of the things that, I found is that it's the little things that really make the biggest differences. And if you do the little things right, it will accumulate and you'll be able to do the bigger things. But if you don't do the little things first, it's very difficult to do the big things. And that's kind of where, I talk about the 3 R's: record, remind, report. I mean, it's such a simple concept, but a lot of times, people don't do that. They don't do the basics. I mean,
you go to a meeting. How many times you've been to a meeting and people are talking, blah, 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 blah. And then the meeting ends and you walk out and that's it. I mean, nobody wrote anything down. There was no action items. There was no follow-up scheduled. There was no, reminders of what to get done. What was the chances of anything happening after that meeting? Pretty much zero.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of where, in business and just in life, it's about, focusing on the little things that you do, day in, day out, and then that accumulates over time as long as you're headed in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. So walk me through those 3 R's. I don't want to just breeze over it because I think there's a lot of good nuggets here to learn, right? So walk me through the 3 R's and why each one of them matters.
Okay, so record the first one. You're in a meeting, you're talking to someone, you're on a phone call, whatever. The first thing you got to realize is that you're going to forget. That's the first thing. People are human. Humans forget, and if you don't write something down, it's gone. How many times you walk out of a meeting and an hour later, somebody asks you, so what did they talk about in the meeting, or what was decided, or what was anybody going to do? If it wasn't written down, it's gone. That's the first one, is record. The second is saying remind. So you got to set up some sort of reminder to say, all right, if you don't put in, first of all, if you just record it, write it down, stick it in a drawer, you're going to forget what it was, right? So you got to set some sort of system in place or some sort of method just to remind you, whether that's a calendar invite or an action item or a task list. There's many different ways to do that. So that's the second R is to set up a reminder. And then the third is report, which means to hold yourself accountable, or hold other people's accountable. If you're the manager or the project manager, then there needs to be an opportunity for the people to report back to say, okay, yes, was this accomplished or not? And that accountability, drives everything. Because if there isn't anybody that's saying, okay, is this getting done, then it just won't happen either.
Mm-hmm. So how do you take those principles and tangibly integrate them into your business so that is the standard way in which things run?
And there's lots of different ways to do that. I mean, but there's all these different tools in the software world. There's kind of a flavor of the one of the kind of the popular methodology right now is called agile development, rapid prototyping and things like that. There's tools like the software called Jira from this company where it's all ticket based. You create these tickets and then you write down what you're going to do. You set a period of time, a sprint that it's going to be done, and then you have at the end of the sprint, you have a sprint review, and then the beginning of the sprint, you have a sprint planning. That right there is record, remind, report. Then, for sales tools, for selling, there's these, contact relational management systems, CRMs, Salesforce, and all of these other. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. You're setting up activities where you're saying, okay, I'm going to follow up with this person and this person. I'm going to do it on this date and that date. And then after, you have your weekly meeting and you review that at your weekly meeting with your sales team or your sales reps and see if they executed on it. Mm-hmm. So again, there's lots of different tools. It could just be a task list. Even a Google task list is an example of, a record, remind, report. You write it down, you set a due date, and then at some point you got to report to your manager or your team member or yourself. Mm-hmm. If it's just you, and report to say, okay, yeah, this is what I got done this week or this 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. So I want to get back to the actual business, right? So you really launched Spotter Global with this small scale radar systems, portable. What are some of the other differentiators for your company versus the rest of the market?
So that's where we set ourselves apart. We were the first into the market, this compact radar market, and so we have the most mature product line. And what really kind of differentiates ourselves from our new competitors is the fact that we're more than just a radar company. We have a full solution. We've got, of course, a large suite of radar products. We have 17 different types of radars, different ranges, different frequencies for different applications, both for tracking people, vehicles, boats, drones, and then we have the software, where we call like command and control software, that brings that all together, cues cameras, alarms over into video management systems, and then the kind of the enterprise level software that monitors to make sure everything is working, the health and performance monitoring. So we can provide kind of a full perimeter security solution with all the pieces from one vendor.
How do you know, as you're building out that product cache, where to go, what things we need to be in, what things we need to skip over? I'm sure there's a host of potential product lines you could have inside of your sphere. How do you decide what's important and what's not?
And it's really about listening to the customer. It's what the customer is willing to pay for is how we prioritize. It's about the return on investment. If it's important enough to a customer that they're willing to buy it, to spend their hard-earned money towards it, then that's where we also use that to prioritize what we develop. So that's a matter of being connected, talking with your customers, listening to what they're trying to do, being aware of kind of the new technologies. A case in point is a new sensor that we released this last year in 2025 called the remote drone ID sensor. And this one is our first sensor that's not a radar. It is a listening radio that picks up the broadcast from commercial off-the-shelf drones, and it gives you precise location of where they're at, but also can tell you where the operator is as well. And this is a really great thing and a great technology to have, especially for circumstances like firefighters trying to fighting a wildfire, and they've got an air response, and they have all experienced these nuisance drones where looky-loos are flying drones over, and they got to ground their air response because these drones are flying in. Now with this technology, not only can you know that their drone is there, which is what radar can do as well, but now with that, you can also know where the operator is, so you can send the police out, or you can go talk to them and say, hey, look, get that drone out of the airspace.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of brings me into the next question, which is like, who is the target demographic? Like I imagine the military component is still very heavy inside of your customer base, but who else is really in the market for this?
See, there is, in the remote drone ID space, that in a way is kind of a new market for us. We haven't done, there isn't very many like firefighting departments that, are looking at radar systems. But now that they're having issues with drones and drones interfering with fighting efforts, then that's become, now it's become a high priority, because I was there was this fire in Utah that was fairly close to where we're located, and they had 23 drone incursions over the course of like 5 days, and that caused all kinds of disruptions in the firefighting efforts because of that. And so that's where now we're going to these we're going to police, we're going to local law enforcement, state enforcement, where they're dealing with with problems that people are creating because they're flying drones into airspace, which is conflicting with, either air travel or helicopters. You think of search and rescue, as they're interfering with that type of thing, or over public events, stadiums and things of that nature.
Yeah, I know. A couple of years ago, I went to a conference, and they were talking about that being like one of the largest, civil defense worries is some sort of WMD or mass terrorism event involving, drones. Right, that's the big fear. So as you look into the landscape, right, what is the thing that I should be afraid of? I mean, I guess that's maybe a weirdly worried question, but what's the concern on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's this concern of, and there's the clueless and careless, right? There's that type of thing. Somebody flies a drone over a stadium, it loses connection, maybe it crashes. They got blades, propellers. It can cut people. You can get some people injured by just things crashing on people, right? So there's that type of thing. That's fairly low level, but then there are more of the terrorist type acts. People who really have ill intent to want to cause large scale damage. Now you can buy a drone nowadays for a few $1,000s that can carry like a 10-pound payload. And you think about, okay, and they can launch it from 10 kilometers away on GPS waypoints. You can't detect it with RF, and it can deliver this payload with pinpoint accuracy. Now, what could you do with that? I mean, there's a lot of things you could do with that. That's what when you're talking about these people being worried, that's what they're worried about. And saying, okay, now all of a sudden we got to worry about some, radical who now has the capability of putting a 10-pound payload and flying it, 10 kilometers away into a precise location. And then you can, then your imagination can go wild with, what happens there.
Yeah. So if you're the opposite side of that coin, what is the landscape look like in terms of detection and prevention?
And that's where things have started to move. Fortunately, so the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, for 2026 was just passed like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, really recent. And in that bill, it was approved that local law enforcement, and this is the first time that local law enforcement are allowed to mitigate drones. So before that, they were restricted, by FAA regulations, by FCC regulations from taking down drones. And now with the NDAA Act, after they've been trained, they are authorized to mitigate drones. Now there's still kind of like, well, what does that mean? How can they mitigate it? What's the situations can they mitigate it? There's not a lot of definition there, but it's happening. It's finally happening. That now on a local level, they are able to do something about it. Now, of course, like I said, with the remote drone ID, they can find the operator and talk to the operator. But many times that might be too late. If it really is a terrorist attack, you need to be able to somehow take it down. And so now they're looking at, first off, different types of jamming devices, jamming guns that can interfere with their command and control signals. Obviously, for these other drones, like the fiber optic drones or the drones flying on waypoints using video AI, they've got to do something more kinetic. So there's drones that attack drones type of things, net guns, all kinds of different, stuff that's coming out.
Yeah, it's moving at light speed. It would seem. So we talked a little earlier about AI integration, and obviously AI seems to be getting integrated in everything. I mean, you can't buy a friggin' refrigerator without AI integration now, it would seem. But so how how is AI going to impact the world of detection and radar management?
It definitely it has, and it will, and it'll definitely continue to do so. Because you think about it, AI is just another form of automation. That's all it is. But it's a higher level of automation. So you think of it as a higher level way of doing pattern recognition. And in our case, we released a radar AI software that used our own AI model that used the metadata coming from the radar to classify, what type of target. Is it a dog? Is it a person? Is it a vehicle? Is it a drone? So that helps us to classify what it is, so that way you can reduce the number of alarms that come to the operators that they need to pay attention to. And in security, false alarms are the biggest problem that they have to deal with is false alarms, because all sensor technologies, ours included, aren't 100% accurate. And with AI, that's allowing us to get more and more accurate. And just this last year, in 2025, we released a new version of our command and control software that has both radar AI as well as video AI built in. So not only can we use the radar data to help classify, but we can also use, because we cue cameras onto target, and now we can use the video AI to classify, okay, is that a drone? Is that a bird? Is that a person or a deer? And that, again, further reduces the false alarms. And I see that just continuing as it gets better and better. Then that means that, well, I've even seen other, video AI type tools that we've integrated with that are able to say, okay, are they carrying a gun? So we cue the radar detects that there's somebody out there. We cue a camera onto target. That video stream runs through this other video AI, and then they say, I see a gun, and then they alarm over to the security guards or to the police saying there's alarm detection. Now you can see how useful that would be at campuses, any place that has to deal with the public to know if someone was carrying a gun. Now, of course, that's an exposed gun. It's not like necessarily seen through anything, but people tend to take their guns out as they go in to shoot at people.
Yeah. So with the rate of change inside this space and then like the constant development, how much of the time at Spotter Global is spent versus optimizing current systems versus trying to develop new systems? And like, how do you balance out that world of trying to continue to optimize the things you already offer and make them better and better, and then also completely start and try to make new systems to solve new problems?
Yes, and again, it's kind of driven by the customers, right? Or saying, what are the customers' problems that they're dealing with, and what are they saying? Okay, we really need to have this, and we're willing to pay for it. And if they're saying, well, I've got a new problem, and I really need, and your current solutions, don't quite solve it, and I'm willing to pay for that. That's where we would put more resources towards that. Case in point, last year in Europe, they are saying, well, we want longer range radar systems that don't have to go through like spectrum approval, that are unlicensed. And so we developed a new radar system, what we call the GX500 500-meter range radar, that is unlicensed, meaning that you don't have to go through and talk with or get a license from the FCC, which takes a few months and things like that. So it's just unlicensed, and we just released that this last year. And that was again driven by customers saying, we need this. Here's our problem. We're willing to pay for it.
Okay, that's it. I mean, the system is very interesting, and the new product applications are super interesting, and especially in this emerging world where it seems like we're going to be more and more drone based in our warfare and our protections. Yeah, we're inching towards a Terminator future Skynet, and that's my theory. But tell the people listening where they can find more information about the product lines that you have and the stuff that you're doing, and how they can get hooked up with you.
Yeah, so spotterglobal.com. That's a great place to start from. Also, we've got a YouTube channel, about 60 different videos out there that go over all kinds of different things. So that's a great way to get some quick video content. We put a lot of stuff out there in terms of just how things work and what their applications are. And then of course you can contact us. There's web on our webpage. There's phone numbers, emails, forms. So lots of different ways to talk to us. And you can even schedule an appointment right there with one of our field service engineers. There's a schedule a consultant, and you can get on their calendar and schedule a video call with one of our engineers.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Logan. It's been a pleasure. It's super interesting learning about the work that people are doing inside of that space and the world around the world that I live in that I don't quite have the familiarity with. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, braving the elements, as I'll say, to have a conversation with me, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it too, and hopefully this is informative for your listeners. And I'd be happy to come back anytime and go into any more detail in any areas that I'd like to talk about.
For sure. Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you.